Wednesday, January 24th, 2018, Urbana Civilian Police Review Board is now coming to order, 5:30 p.m. Roll call.
Ricardo Diaz. Scott Dossett.
Here.
Diane Gattal.
Here.
Mikhail Lubinsky.
Here.
Megan McGinty.
Here.
Grace Mitchell. Ivy Williams.
Present. Okay, let's see. Okay, at this time, let's look at the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? Okay, having none, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes. And those minutes would be Wednesday, October 25th, 2017. Do we have any changes?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, been moved in second. All in favor?
Aye.
Same sign, not in favor. So moved. Okay, staff report.
We have none.
Public participation. No public participation. Old business.
We do have a staff report that we need to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
speak
I'm
of.
sorry.
Sorry. I just need to give you guys the budget report for what you have. There was a training with Morris Mosley at the last meeting that we had, and we did pay him $500 for that. Your starting budget was $5,555 for the training budget that you have, and your remaining balance is $5,055
And that was for who again?
for your for the training, for the implicit bias training.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Have we ever talked about the fact that we have a budget and what we want to do with it, if anything?
I remember it's been some time ago, early on, because I remember we used it to go to one of the first meetings, NECO meeting, and I think I went and Todd was supposed to go, and he got ill, or there was illness in his family. So we haven't talked about it recently, but I remember the budget. I couldn't tell you how much or what it was, but I know at that time that's what it was used for, transportation and helping us get there for that.
Yeah, well, I've got no, dreams of Vegas or anything, but I guess I had never heard budget mentioned in this group before, like 30 seconds ago. And so it seems to me as if that's something worth kind of consulting amongst ourselves about things like printing and distribution of brochures or attendance of training and that kind of stuff. What can you tell me? Do you know anything about this budget?
You actually have several different areas where we can use money from for the CPRB. There is a line item for printing materials if you needed to print materials. There is a line item for travel, training and conferences. And I'll have to look. I believe those are the two. Oh, and you have one for community training to be able to pour things into the community, pour trainings and host different things in the community. It is all on the website, but I have no problem with sending you what those line item amounts are.
Yeah, it would be, yes, what's probably in like the mayor's grand budget that's submitted.
No, it
kind of
actually
a
is
thing.
public knowledge, so it is something
Yeah.
that you are able to see. So I can send you guys what the amounts for each line item to allow you to be able to do things, whether it be training, outside training, somewhere else, printing notifications or publications for the community. I can send that to you.
And so this budget, the $5,000 that's there needs to be spent before the end of July.
The end of June.
The end of June.
June
Okay, so
30th, the fiscal year.
1st of July. Okay.
Yeah, it from what I can tell you guys, this particular board, there was money spent, like Ms. Williams said, for NACO training last year. You probably don't hear about it as much because if you don't spend anything, there's no changes or there's no money being taken from it.
Sure, and I understand you can't just spend the money, you have to plan to spend the money. So, yeah, I think it would be, I mean, I'd like to suggest that, the members of the board get some kind of information about how much and what category there is
Absolutely.
there.
I absolutely can get that to you.
And that may stimulate us to, for example, do some outreach that we might have not thought to do on our own, with the thought of, a zero budget, which again was what I would have assumed until we started this conversation. So I know other board members have gone to NACOL meetings, but it's always been, not really, no. But
Would you, I think it's good for us to have, be represented there, bring back.
Well, I'm not sure. I'd be willing to have conversation about that, but the point is that's always been kind of a mystery pick.
Okay, yep,
know
I
what I
can
mean?
absolutely get you the information. It's, again, like I had said before, it's public knowledge out there. That's one of the things that they talk about when they are doing the budgets and releasing what the budget looks like for each fiscal year.
Right, yeah.
But I didn't realize that you didn't get that information.
No, I mean, I do other things for the city, and I've seen that, but I've never really looked for us.
Okay.
So
Yep,
this
it's
is as
there.
much
I
my
can
problem as it is
I will
anybody else's.
absolutely send it to you. You guys will have it in your in the morning.
Yeah, okay, great. Well, thank you so much.
No problem.
Okay, thank you. New business?
Well,
Okay.
as far as
There you
your new business is concerned, the first item on there would be the taser reviews. We have 4 cases to review. We have Lieutenant Searles here to assist us with that. So, Ivy, when you're ready, you can get us started with that.
Where they, okay. Are we going to be able to view them like we've done before, or?
Yes, ma'am. I sent them, a couple weeks ago, I sent out that the videos were online, at your online access. Well, we will be viewing them as well. I believe they come on your screens
Okay.
as well. We're going to be reviewing them here. Lieutenant Searles will be reading. About 2 or 3 weeks ago,
You
because
got,
we
was
was going
that
to have the
something
meeting
I
on the
should have
17th.
brought here for the meeting for us to do, or what?
No, no, ma'am. No, I'll just.
They were previewed for us to view, like.
Right. And then I thought we would do it the same way we've done it, and Lieutenant
Yes,
Searles will go
that's
ahead and
exactly
do
what's
that
going to happen. I was
process.
just waiting for you to prompt Lieutenant
Okay.
Searles to.
I just would like to point out, or just say, and with thanks, that the links work just fine. I could get in and out of them pretty well. I might want to have a little bit of discussion about this after doing a little bit of homework myself, because I thought I saw something related to them on a Google Drive, and I'm not sure it was supposed to be there. So Preston, I'd like to just, I may actually have to have you
I
down
have
to
no
the
idea
house
why
and
it's on a
look
Google Drive,
at,
right.
at what my screen looks like, because I thought, whoa, why is this on there? But anyway,
is that how it's playing through your? Because it's. I don't even have a Google Drive on my computer, so it shouldn't have been on any.
I want to talk a little bit about. It worked great, but I had a question.
Understood.
So
okay, we can do that.
I may need to talk to somebody who's a guru to fill all the blanks in for me.
Absolutely.
Okay, Lieutenant Searles, now that we've all caught up to speed, I'm
All
awake.
right. Everyone doing all right this evening?
Yes.
All right. So we've got 4 cases we're going to be doing tonight. The first one, let's see, on July the 9th, 2017, at approximately 10:42 p.m., Urbana police officers were dispatched to a business in southeast Urbana for a report of a robbery in progress. Officers were informed by Metcalf that a black male wearing a white T-shirt and black pants entered the business and took approximately $1,200 after slamming the female to the ground, dragging her around and kicking her. As officers were investigating the robbery, a witness reported witnessing a portion of the incident and that a white Mercury sedan that looked similar to an older police car might have been involved. A few minutes after the police arrived, a silver Mercury Grand Marquis, which has an identical body style to the Ford Crown Victoria, approached the scene at a high rate of speed. The vehicle stopped in front of the business, and a black male wearing a white T-shirt and black pants exited the vehicle. The witness witnessed the driver exit the vehicle and spontaneously told a police officer, "Oh God, I think that's him." The police officer challenged the driver with his duty pistol and ordered the driver to get on the ground. The driver refused to comply with the orders given and instead yelled at the police officer to, quote, "shoot me." The driver then began to inexplicably strip naked. The police officer transitioned to his taser and turned off the safety. The driver continued to refuse to comply with commands given. Once a sufficient number of officers arrived at the scene, the driver was taken into custody. The driver was arrested and taken from the scene.
All right, so now I will play the taser video.
Stay right there. Stay right there listening. Get down on the ground.
I'm not getting down.
Get down on the ground.
I just pulled up.
Yeah, I
Shoot
know.
me for?
Because you're a suspect in a crime. Get down on the ground.
What you want to shoot me
Get
for?
down on the ground.
What you want? I'm not getting down on the ground. You
Get down on the ground.
shoot?
You're on video and audio.
I know that.
Okay. What is going on here?
Shoot me.
What is going on
I
here?
don't know. I just pulled up.
Okay, why are you doing this?
You tell me.
Why are you doing this?
You act like you want to shoot.
Why are you taking your clothes
You
off?
want to shoot me.
I don't want to shoot you.
You do want to shoot
I want to find out what happened here in the
You
store.
shoot me, then put your gun down. You scare
Okay,
me.
I've got you a taser point.
You scare me.
Okay?
I stripped down because you scared me.
No,
I have
that's
no
not why
weapon.
you did that. Okay?
I have no weapon. I pose no
Okay.
threat.
Get down on the ground.
No.
I'm giving you a lawful order.
No.
I'm giving you a lawful order. Get down on the
You pulled
ground.
up and you pulled your gun out on me.
Okay, I did because you're a suspect in a crime.
You scared me.
Okay, that's not why you're doing
That's
this.
it. Show me
Okay.
that I have no weapon.
Excuse me, that's why you're taking me to custody.
I pose no threat. I pose no threat. Get on the ground now. What's the problem? Get on the ground now.
Any questions?
It was
34.
file number 3409.
3409. Okay. All right, okay, great, yeah. Yeah, I had a comment on one of them, and I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't this one. Thank you.
Is there a protocol for when the taser is put away once it's pulled out?
Is there a protocol as to when the taser's put away? I think under these circumstances, if I was the officer running the taser, I probably would have put it away exactly when it got put away so I could go help with the arrest. One of the things that's important to reduce uses of force is actually to use a sufficient number of officers, especially when you have somebody that's being uncooperative like this. If it's a one-on-one type interaction, things tend to escalate in terms of use of force. So the more officers you have, the better. So if I had been that officer, I would have put my taser away when he did. That's why the video stopped. So
Is your mic on, Rich?
there's a green light.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. All right, the next one. On August 26th at approximately 1:11 a.m., Urbana police were dispatched to a single-family residence in southeast Urbana for a report of a domestic disturbance, specifically a male and female yelling in the street. Officers arrived and found about 12 people standing in the yard yelling at each other. Officers made contact with the female and began to discuss the situation. As this was occurring, a male began yelling at the officer that it was, quote, none of his business, and started walking aggressively towards the officer. 3 unknown males then grabbed the male that was yelling and essentially began dragging him towards the house. The female explained that the male that was yelling was intoxicated. As the male was being directed to the house, he continued to yell and broke free and approached the officer again aggressively. The intoxicated male only stopped approaching the officer when threatened with pepper spray. The 3 unknown males again attempted to get the intoxicated male inside. The intoxicated male then began shoving and physically fighting with the 3 males, to include punching one of the 3 in the face. The officers attempted to reinitiate the investigation, but quickly heard the sounds of a physical fight from inside the house. Officers walked to the house, but the female attempted to stop officers. The officers disregarded the female and turned their attention to the intoxicated male. They directed the male out of the house. The male refused and pushed an officer away. Officers then physically tried to remove the intoxicated male from the house, but were unsuccessful. The group of 3 males that had dragged the intoxicated male in the house then began to pull the intoxicated male further into the house. An officer removed his taser, pointed at the intoxicated male and the group of 3 males. The intoxicated male was then removed from the house and arrested. The male was taken from the scene to the county jail.
All right. We will start the video.
How are you touching me? Step outside. Step outside. Mr. Wait up. Stay back inside.
I'm so scared of African
You have no right to touch me like this.
Don't
Touch
touch
me.
me.
Move off me. Roll over.
Let him roll over. But see, this officer right here,
I'll talk to you in just a second.
but they didn't have to act like this. I told you I had my son.
Just relax.
No, I ain't gonna relax because y'all drug my son out. One of your officers pushed me, and I will make a fucking formal complaint. Y'all are fucking crazy. No, these are new people. These are new people. No, this man knows us.
We're going.
Somebody get that phone out. My son has a bad arm. Record this shit. Please, he's doing it. No, I'm crazy. I don't care, because you know us. You know us. We have all our y'all in this house. Don't put him. Don't do nothing. Don't touch me. Don't do nothing. But all y'all are aggressive, and y'all know that's why people don't like our police. That's why people don't love us. I know you don't care. I know you don't care, but I'm going to tell you. But you know what? Y'all are most white men that have problems in your lifetime. No, I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to talk to you. Whatever your last name is. No, I'm not going to talk to you because
I have the bond money in my pocket.
Give me your
I'm coming right
I
up.
need his stuff out his
I'm
pocket.
coming right up.
Okay, but you know what? I'm not going to talk to none of y'all. Because the only my son,
Why you think
y'all
I'm
he
doing
might
that?
come out of my house
You
and
so
shut
mad.
that motherfucker right there for me. And I will fucking make a complaint. I can stand right here. I'm not touching you. I'm not touching him. I'm not touching you. Are you gonna take me? Is that what you're gonna do? That's what I've seen you done before. Are you gonna take me? Because it was wrong. Y'all ran up in my house. Y'all pushed me back on my whole woman. And then, not to mention, you pushed a 14-year-old at that. And pushed me. Yeah, and I told you he was drunk. No, none of us recorded. Give me my brother. Y'all get him on
Have some respect for her.
Where's my phone? Give me the phone.
No,
Can you
you
give me my brother?
Go ahead,
Go ahead, Sam. My brother. Give him his phone.
Pull him up.
Please don't come up on me. Give me my brother's shit. Give me my brother's stuff out of his pocket. Don't touch me. Don't touch me. I want my brother's shit out of his pocket.
Don't worry about it.
I want everything. We coming right to get
Do
you.
y'all really believe that I'm gonna sit in jail? Y'all really believe that?
Can you?
Can you talk to her? Her? Yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah, I guess I have one or a comment. The idea of the legs moving in front of me while this guy's got the taser activated seems a little random. And I'm wondering if in this case the taser's being used as an AV documentation tool as opposed to a use of force tool, and whether that makes any difference. I think about a weapon being drawn, whether it be the taser or a sidearm, at a specific point. And in this video, we saw a half a dozen people walk in front of those red lights. Part of the reason I advocated for tasers in the department was to try to prevent, obviously, escalation of, physical contact, people getting hurt. Instead of, in the prior case, the guy put a gun away and do his taser. I like that. But when I see these kind of displays, I wonder whether or not the uniqueness of that as it's being used is being lost. So I know I'm reeling off a lot of questions. I'm just kind of, shooting from the hip, as it were, here. That's what I do.
Yes, I do.
And the other thing that I noted during this case was that on the taser usage form, the response to did display or taser deter gain compliance from the subject, it's marked no. Of course, I want to see positive hits there, not negative hits,
Sure.
right? And so I'm just kind of weaving this in a broad kind of question, I guess. A fair question would be, did you think that this was an advisable use of the taser? And then if you could kind of project or speculate how this kind of like ground level aiming of the device, would that aid the ability of the officer to then deploy that? Or are, there are cops that in Urbana that wish they had body cameras, and they're using tasers instead of body cameras?
Yeah. So I think those are interesting observations, and they're things that I've noticed as well. One of the things that when we did the initial training with the first round of officers that I told them is, if you're gonna have the taser, go ahead and get the camera on early, because we want to see pre-deployment behavior that's important. So just go ahead and turn it on. And again, the policy says that if they take it out of the holster, it's supposed to be turned on.
Right.
So with respect to, is this being used as sort of a body camera? There's been a few instances. I remember one of the cases that we reviewed early on was in a hotel. I don't know if you remember that. There was lots of carpet and feet. And in that particular case, I spoke with the officer, and that's exactly what she was doing. She was using it to sort of capture some of the behavior. And I think in that particular instance, it was actually still in the holster. She was able to, her particular holster, she was able to flip the safety switch off, but it was still in her holster. So I think there is some of that going on. In this particular case, sometimes the taser, there's a light on the taser, and there's obviously the lasers, and those things people see. And when they see that, they recognize that, and they recognize it to be from a taser. And so that in and of itself is sort of a use of force. Just like in the previous case where the officer threatened to use the pepper spray.
Sure.
I've used that a number of times. Put your hands behind your back, or I'm going to pepper spray you, and I'd have my pepper spray out. Just, I'm not kidding, sort of thing. So in that regard, using a taser in this case, I think was appropriate, because you're sort of elevating it, saying, hey, listen, I've got this other tool. And a lot of people really don't care for tasers. They've heard stories about how they hurt, and they do hurt. And so I don't know if I've gotten all of your sort of thought process weaved in my sort of editorial comments or not.
Yeah, so this guy's got the taser on and with one hand.
Right.
Is he kind of then motioning, you think, around to kind of clear these people from the doorway? It's hard to...
Yeah, so the short answer is I don't know the answer to your question. I don't know if he's trying to get people in or out, or if people are walking freely. In this particular instance, I mean, you've got 12 people. There's clearly one person that's unruly. He's intoxicated. He's not. I mean, he's punching his own friends, for God's sakes. Yeah. So clearly something's not fully connecting in terms of what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. When you've got a handful of officers there and you're outnumbered, sometimes you have to elevate those things just to say, hey, I'm going to protect myself, and there will be no shenanigans tonight. So. Yeah, this is one of those one of those instances where the video isn't tremendously helpful. I mean, you can hear things, so you understand sort of the tone of what's going on.
Yeah.
You can understand that it's heated, and there's a lot of passion in there. So
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not suggesting that he should have had it pointed
Right.
at
Well-
a bunch of random bodies, but, you know, as those legs kind of move in front of me, I think, man, I hope that thing doesn't go off now, because
Right,
that's
yeah.
kind of a bystander almost at
Right.
that point, you know?
Yeah, so, you know, in terms of moving sort of the direction of where the taser's pointed, and what the officer's doing is, and I think we've talked about this again, the Sewell position. I remember we were debating as to whether or not it was Spanish or Portuguese, and I believe we landed on Sewell is South in Portuguese, and so they've got the taser sort of at their chest, pointed down in what's referred to as a Sewell position. That's what the officer's doing in this particular case. It's just sort of a safe, non-threatening. They've got good control of the weapon. You know, if they need to transition to the taser and go ahead and use it, it's pretty quick. And it's something that's consistent with our training with our firearms, so it's very familiar.
Yeah, and I mean, they are really also providing light to people coming and going. I mean,
Sure.
it's the middle of the night, right? And that's
Yeah.
the flashlight that's
Yeah.
there. So
Yeah.
that's one of the first things I thought, is he's actually kind of helping people come out of the apartment by giving them a little bit of light.
I'm gonna go ahead and take the leap on this one. I'm pretty sure he was not trying to provide light.
Yeah,
I think
okay.
I think he was. I think he was trying to do something else.
All right.
Yeah, can I comment on something you said? If people are coming between the officer and the person he's trying to calm down or arrest or whatever, they're not just random people. I mean, if they get hit, it's because of their own behavior. So I don't think, you know, he was putting them in danger. They were putting themselves in danger of being tased. So it was a crazy situation, it sounded like.
Yeah.
Can I just ask one question about the audio?
Sure.
It appeared, was it due to the enormous amount of people trying to come through that one small doorway that the audio was like flickering in and out?
That was the redaction.
Oh, that was
When
the
people
redaction.
use names, we redact them out.
Wow, there were a lot of names then, because I was like,
Yeah.
what's going on?
It was a little sort of choppy and difficult to understand. Yeah, just so everybody knows, when the redaction process starts, I get a report. I go through, and there's a lady that I work with in the investigations division. She and I do the redactions of the reports together. She's very good at it, so really she does it and I approve it. So
Kudos to her, because,
Yes.
I mean, that could not have been an easy one.
well, that's just the reports. I do the video, so thank you for the kudos.
Yeah.
So I will literally sit down and listen to every second of these videos, and you know, I get out a piece of paper and fill up my glass of water and sit there and okay, play, pause. And so it's one of the things I've actually told the officers is, hey, listen, when you're on these scenes, you can use their name, and using names is an important tool sometimes to calm people down, but don't, you know, every 3 seconds use the person's name, because I have to redact it out every 3 seconds. So sometimes, yeah, you'll get the audio and it'll be very choppy, and it's just because of the names. So, but you know, things like profanity, I don't redact that out, and you guys heard some in there. Yeah, yeah.
There's a female in the video that says that she's going to file a complaint. Was there any complaint filed?
You know, off the top of my head, I don't know the answer to that question. I think the answer to the question is no, however.
If there were a complaint, would we know about it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you would.
Okay.
It would depend if they mediated or got it taken care of before it got
If
here.
it made it past.
If it made past,
yeah.
maybe the chief or something
Yeah,
like that.
you're absolutely right.
Yeah, it would depend upon whether they filled out the form.
All of
Had
it.
it notarized.
Yeah,
sent
and
it
I
back.
can tell you from experience, both as a patrol officer and a patrol supervisor, it's not uncommon for people to say they're going to file complaints and don't. Actually, the majority of the complaints that I handled as a supervisor, they never said they were going to file a complaint. And the majority of the time when they said they were going to file a complaint, they didn't. So, okay. All right.
Ready for
I
the
have
next
just a
one?
comment for him. I am so happy seeing this a year and a half later, and this is what we get, because there's, in a way for me, an impartial witness recording something that otherwise we wouldn't have had, and we're just wondering. And if this had been elevated with a complaint, and then it comes back to us, and we didn't have a video of the floor, it's really hard to imagine. Every time I read the reports, I'm like, do I know what happened? So I got to get my little timeline, and trying to mix all the everything. If I had to do a decision later where it got escalated, I would be thankful for something pointing at the ground that puts it down. So I'm happy that it was present, that it wasn't used, except for recording, even if it's just audio. We had our first review included mostly pointing down kind of audio or pointing far away. And I was like, that's what happened. Because it filled in all the voids of the 2 or 3 reports that had come in. So I'm happy that this is where it's at, and that once again it was present, and it helps us see what happened better.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that it really kind of illustrates is that sometimes to author these police reports so you're painting a picture can be difficult, especially if you're tired, it's the middle of the night, and you've got 3 or 4 other reports to write. So I think it's noteworthy that sometimes these reports are difficult. So hopefully they're helpful to you in the process, and they paint a picture that sort of coincides with sometimes what you see on video.
Yeah.
So, any other questions about this particular one? No? Okay. So I believe this is the third one. On August 31st, 2017, at approximately 9:21 p.m., officers were dispatched to a single-family residence in southeast Urbana for a report of a suicidal person. MEC had informed officers that a subject in question had previously attempted suicide and that he was threatening suicide again. The suicidal subject also was reported to have consumed approximately a fifth of Captain Morgan rum. Officers arrived and met with the reporting person. While they were speaking with the reporting person, the suicidal person appeared and blood was running down his arm. Officers directed the subject to sit down, but they noted that he was, quote, cycling through multiple emotions and very quickly. They noted that the subject was clearly intoxicated during their interaction. The subject was agitated, refused to stay seated, and told officers that he was going to go back into the house. An officer drew his taser but did not point it at the subject. Ultimately, paramedics arrived and were prepared to transport the suicidal subject to the hospital. The suicidal subject then stood up and declared that he was going back into the house yet again. The taser officer again drew his taser, and officers handcuffed the subject. It was at this point that the subject threatened to kill an officer. The subject was ultimately transported to the hospital to treat his wounds and on a petition for involuntary committal. The subject was treated and released on both accounts and was arrested for domestic battery, unlawful restraint, and endangering the life health of a child.
Okay, we have 3 videos that go with this report. They're fairly short videos, but I'm going to play them back to back.
Can it be louder?
No, I was wondering earlier. Let me see.
I think it's in the lower right-hand corner.
Sorry about that.
My elbow. No, my elbow. It's my elbow.
Would you like to hear that one again? Okay, we can move to the next one.
Approach me. Don't hurt me, okay? I want you to turn around. I want you to put your hands behind your back. You understand? Okay. You got something. Be careful with the blood. Oh, hey, different. Oh, can I close the house? Oh, no, you're not under arrest. You're under arrest. We're just for everybody's safety. You're being so upset, okay? That's all it is. Yeah, I am so fucking cool.
Any questions? Again, lots of ground.
I have an unrelated question, or just procedure.
Mm-hmm.
Putting handcuffs on somebody, in this case for, just in case, how does that get announced, or who decides? Well, an officer decides that this is the right thing to do. But if somebody was trying to put cuffs on me without me knowing, and I'm upset, I'm going to get more upset. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So where is, you know, cuffs are going on you, or everybody, I'm going to put cuffs on him because he's dangerous. Where's the communication at that level? Because it's tense all around, but cuffs would elevate it, just like any weapon in the situation. Well, maybe not as much, but it would still, like.
So you're going to find my answer curious. We very rarely announce that we're putting handcuffs on people. And the reason is, in the instances, through our training and experience, when we announce, hey, we're putting you in handcuffs, that's typically when the fight starts. And so it's typically we use nonverbal communication with another officer. So if Preston and I were arresting somebody, I would give him a signal, and the signals vary. I would give him a signal that we were going to handcuff somebody, and that he and I would then assume physical control of their arms. We've got some pretty specific techniques that we use, and then we put the handcuffs on. And as we're, you know, putting their hands behind their back and getting the cuffs out and putting them on, that's when, hey, listen, just calm down. We're going to put these on you. So, but we do not announce in advance typically.
So from the other side then, as an advocate, when I teach people that something's happening, one of the questions we teach them to say is, am I under arrest?
Sure, absolutely.
Right? Because, especially if cuffs are on, I think I'm under arrest.
If a police officer puts handcuffs on you, you can assume you're under arrest.
That's right.
Yeah.
So at that point then, in this circumstance, there was no necessarily arrest, you know, medical team, whatever
Yeah, but you
else.
have to remember, he also threatened to kill an officer, and he had already hurt himself. So the reason that the handcuffs get put on is for the safety of the person that we're dealing with and the officers there.
Right, so there's already a safety issue.
Yes.
But in a way, you're already moving towards arrest, too.
Right. So in this particular instance, he went to the hospital first. That was our primary concern. If the hospital had said, hey, we're keeping him, he would have stayed there. But in this particular instance, the hospital said, he's fine. He doesn't need to stay here. He doesn't need to be here for mental health treatment. He doesn't need to be here for his wounds. And they released him. And so at that point, then they arrested him and took him to the jail. So.
But to teach people to ask the question, am I under arrest? I don't know if in this case you guys were planning to put cuffs on me, but I can pretty much know that if cuffs are there, I'm under arrest.
Yes.
So
yes.
I don't need, I can tell people, if they got cuffs on you, you're probably under arrest.
Yeah.
Don't ask the question anymore.
Right.
Keep your mouth shut.
Right.
Is what
So
we would teach.
so the to use a different word than arrest, let's talk about custody, because custody is actually what the law looks at. So for things like, when do I read you Miranda? The question is, are you in custody? And so if you're in a pair of handcuffs put on by a police officer, you can safely assume that you're in custody. So in this case, he was in the officer's custody. It was more of a protective custody than a custodial arrest. So yes, if you are having a conversation with them and you're trying to explain to them when somebody is in custody, yes, if a police officer puts handcuffs on you, you are in custody.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay.
I think I have one. So if you're in custody, would you still do the Miranda?
So the prong or the test for Miranda is, are you in custody? Would a reasonable person believe they're in custody? And you can be in custody without being in handcuffs, just to be abundantly clear. And I don't want to go into a long dissertation about what the courts have said about that, because the list is long. You know, if there's 4 hulking police officers standing over you and you're sitting in the corner in a chair, you know, the courts have said things like that tend to, you know, make people believe they're in custody. So would a reasonable person believe they're in custody, and are you being asked questions that can incriminate you? So, for example, if I ask you, what is your name? That's not a question that can incriminate you. But if I said, did you steal the candy bar? That is. So, custody and questioning, that's the test for Miranda. Okay? Any other questions?
Are there 3 videos because 3 tasers were deployed?
No, they turned the taser off and then turned it back on.
Thank you.
Sometimes on the lengthy videos, they'll segment and it has to do with the software. It'll segment the video just for file size purposes, but that's usually around the 10-minute mark.
What would be the rationale for turning them off and on? Like just a gauge of risk at that point?
So without having been there, and I read this report months ago, so I don't remember all the specifics of it. I just remember sort of in broad swaths what this was about. I would say that the officer probably turned the taser off because he probably thought the subject had calmed down enough where he didn't think he was going to use it. Again, I talked about how he was cycling through his emotions. So it was just a judgment call on the officer's part to turn it off and put it away. And again, when you're dealing with somebody who's upset, getting a taser out might upset them even more. And if they're sufficiently calm that you don't need it, then you might as well put it away. So I'm speculating that it was something like that where they thought, you know what, we're probably all right here. But yeah, I know it's frustrating getting multiple videos. Like, why did you turn the video back on? I just don't have an answer in this particular case.
Wouldn't you turn it off if you need both?
Well, that's another reason, if you needed both hands. But based on sort of what I saw in the video, I think the taser, one of the things that we've taught the taser officers is in situations where a taser might be needed, let another officer be the contact officer. So if Ricardo and I are the police officers and we're dealing with Scotty, Ricardo might be doing the talking when I've got the taser, because I need to focus on my job, which is running the taser, and he needs to focus on his job, which is doing the talking. And it's sometimes difficult to do both those things at once. Humans are not very good at multitasking sometimes. And so it's easier if we have that sort of contact officer and then I'm sort of the safety officer. So that might be why the officer was just sort of standing there. And it was difficult to hear the voices. They kind of sounded like they were in the distance. So I'm guessing it was something like that. There was another officer being the primary contact officer, and the taser officer was just there as sort of the safety officer. Okay. Any other questions?
Well, just a comment. I think this is the first report that I've seen the officer actually report that the perpetrator didn't see the taser. He mentions that specifically in the report.
Yeah.
And so I think it kind of speaks to the sensitivities about agitation and stuff like that you were talking about.
Sure.
So, and that would lead me to believe that you might be kind of on and off and on and off, depending upon literally what the voices were doing behind you in the building or something like that.
That is certainly a consideration. Another thing to consider is that the officer might just try to be sneaky. If I sort of hide around the corner and he doesn't know I'm here, then I've got element of surprise on my side as well. So that could be, it's a tactical consideration that officers, every call is sort of a tactical game to make sure that everybody's safe, and sometimes, not being at the forefront, being off to the side, being in the back, being in the dark, being behind a tree, stuff like that. These are the sorts of things that the officers have to consider when they're, engaged in these calls for service.
Yeah, it's an interesting juxtaposition to the first one, where the young man disrobed, because I think from the way I read the report, he was by himself for a while there.
He was.
And so the threat posture of the individual, and he had the lights right on him.
Yes.
It was just pull and it's done.
Right.
Very firm on a leg, and very firm on a chest. So it's just interesting to kind of try to get inside the officer's head and see why they're, why and what they're using it for. So
Sure. Anything else on this one? Okay. I believe we're on our last one. On October 2nd, 2017, at approximately 5:10 p.m., Urbana police officers were dispatched to report of a violation of order protection at a daycare center. Officers were informed, that a father of a child at a daycare center had begun to cause problems at the front desk. The father had previously been served with an order of protection, which listed the daycare center as a protected address. Ultimately, the father removed his son from the daycare center despite the order of protection, which precluded any contact with his son. An Urbana police officer responded to the scene, an Urbana police officer responding to the scene observed the father's vehicle leaving the area and initiated a traffic stop. During the contact, the father refused to comply with officers' commands to exit the vehicle and at one point ordered his son to place his head against the window of the car to prevent the officer from forcing entry into the car. After approximately 1 hour of talking with the barricaded father and telling the father that he was under arrest, the decision was made to forcibly enter the vehicle. The father, realizing that officers were actually going to force entry, unlocked the vehicle and stepped out. A taser officer removed his taser from the holster during the arrest, but resecured it once the arrest was completed. The father was transported to the county jail on charges of violation of order of protection, endangering the life, health of a child, and resisting obstructing a police officer.
All right, so this one has 2 videos that are fairly short as well. Start with the first one.
This is on. Camera's on.
That concludes the first one. We'll go to the second one.
I know, we'll do that when we get out. Step out and face the car. Go chase him. Can you get him, please?
And that concluded the second one.
Questions?
When they are saying chase him, I assume they're talking about the point when the boy bolted?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. They didn't want him to run into traffic, and they just needed to bring him back. He was scared, understandably. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions?
For me, just a clarification, because I've had a couple of people tell me that they watch this, and for the public, we get as many reports as there were officers there most of the
You
time.
get as many reports as are authored. Not every time a police officer goes on a call will they author a report.
Okay, so if there's 2 in the car, because sometimes I'll mention there was 2 of us in the car, only one has to report it?
Right. So really it's about reporting all the facts, not necessarily, so, okay. I love playing
See-
these where I make you a police officer. So
Well,
recorder.
this is good because what happens is people are watching the video, they don't
Right.
get to see what we have in
I
front
get
of
it.
us.
I get it. Okay, so you and I are in a car together.
Okay,
And we go and we're going to arrest Preston. And let's say that you're the primary officer, and we're going to arrest Preston for, I don't know. I love the example of stealing a candy bar. So Preston steals a candy bar, and we're going to go arrest him. So Preston, we watched you on video stealing the Milky Way. You're coming with us, and we put him in handcuffs, and we take him out to the county jail, or we write him a ticket or whatever, and we're done with that. And so we have to write an arrest report. So let's say it's your turn to write the reports, because I don't know, let's say we change
We
every
take
day,
turns.
or we're training car, or whatever example you want to use, but it's your turn to write the report. You would write the report, we investigated this theft of the Milky Way, and Officer Searles and I made contact with Preston, and we told him he was under arrest, put him in handcuffs, and transported him to the county jail. I don't have to write a police report, unless I use force. But if it's just a standard arrest where there's nothing out of the ordinary, I wouldn't have to write a police report. Now, if I had some involvement in the investigation where I had pertinent information, or if I used force, or if I noticed something like I searched him and I found the Milky Way in his pocket, then I would write a report. But just a standard report, there's not always a report per officer.
okay, again for learning.
Sure.
He contests it, and we go to court. You were there,
Yes.
I was there.
Yes.
We both don't have time to go, or are we subpoenaed and both of us have to go because he's contesting it in court?
We would probably both go.
Okay,
We would probably both go.
because then the questions go to all the people that were there.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Normally, I mean, I've seen it where the officer doesn't show.
Right.
I used to observe court. The
Sure.
officer doesn't show.
Right.
So then that person's got the story,
Right.
and there's a report, so.
So now there are instances where only one of us was testifying in court. So there's been a number, so, okay, here's an example. I was the case agent on a homicide investigation. I was the lead detective, and I testified for about 6 minutes.
The whole thing.
Yeah. There are other people involved, but they might extract some bits of information from me and some from you and some from Scotty to tell their story in court. So typically, you know, in situations like that, the state's attorney's office would issue subpoenas for everybody involved in the call and then probably narrow it down for purposes of being efficient in the presentation in court. But chances are you and I would both get a subpoena.
In the situation, at least for our purposes of viewing the videos, there were two of us involved. One of us writes the reports, and we would get one report
Correct.
and at this body.
Right, but there would probably be mentioned in there that you and I were together.
Yeah.
And there, you know, there's other sections on the report where it says other officers, you know, additional officers. It's typically.
If you were holding the taser and I was writing the report, do
Well,
you have to write-
if I was holding a taser, I would definitely write a
You would
report.
have to write a
Yeah.
report. Okay.
Because they have to complete the taser usage form, and they were the ones that used force, so yes, they would write a report.
Oh, that's right, using the taser is using force, so it triggers
Right.
automatically.
It's like
that.
making sausage.
Yeah.
There's lots of bits that go into it.
Okay, well, good.
Yeah.
No, and as we learn, I mean, there's people out there
Sure.
that, you know, they need to be scared of tasers.
Sure.
I'm
I'm scared of
them
tasers.
now. I've seen the videos
Yeah,
now, and it's scary.
It's uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable is not enough. It's scary. Anyway, all right, thank you for training.
Yeah.
I just am curious, what is a stop stick? I've never heard of that before.
Okay, so there's a couple different kinds of stop sticks, but basically what they do is that they deflate tires. There's basically giant hollow needles, and we put them out on the road. So a lot of times you'll see them, let's say Saturday night you love watching Cops, and you see the car chases, and there's always a police officer on the side of the road, and he's waiting for the car to drive up, and he throws something out into the road, and then the car drives over it. Those are stop sticks, and so they deflate the tires. They would be highly efficient to slow down speeders. They're very expensive, though. Yeah.
All right.
Any other questions? Okay.
Okay, Ivy, it's back
Okay,
to you.
Thank you. Okay, that goes now to B, where we have Ricardo Diaz request for meeting with the Urbana Police Department Chief of Police.
Actually, that's an easy one. 2 meetings ago, we concluded that we ought to talk to the chief for several items, and we decided that 2 or 3 of us would go. And then that couldn't go until it was on the agenda, and so that's where it was. We were discussing, sure, right now it just went out of my head. I had it before I came here. Anyway, we just needed authorization, or it had to be on the agenda, so we can go back to that, minutes from 2 times ago, and we decided we'd go visit her. At the time, we thought it was Sylvia. I think it was that long ago, 3 or 4 months back.
I remember you bringing up wanting to go visit the police chief. I didn't remember whether someone was supposed to join you. I kind of thought you were going to go and then report back to us. That was my recollection, so.
Well, it came out that it was going to be a board decision to get the information for the board. I believe it has something to do with how many times a weapon was drawn, because the question was asked during the use of force training. And Slosher, of course, didn't know the answer, and we weren't able to answer, so that was a question for the police chief of Urbana, which would have been Sylvia. So there needed to be a vote for that to go forward because of the board rules, is what I was advised.
Okay. I do remember there was agreement on that also, so at this time, we'll take a vote. At this time, we'll take a motion, I guess, to vote for the request of a meeting with the Urbana Police Chief of Police.
I so move.
Second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Oppose?
Aye. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
You voted twice.
I
You
can't
voted
vote
twice,
You
Ricardo.
Let my first one stand.
Okay,
Okay.
your first one to stand. Okay, so it's been motion passed and approved that we set up a meeting or make a request to have a meeting with the Urbana Police Department Chief of Police. At this time, do we want to have a committee or someone to go along? I think, Ricardo, you wanted to go
I would
for sure.
prefer it that it's not just one, and two, a question afterwards.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So, is there anyone that has an interest to going in, or do we want to nominate anyone, or anyone care to join? We at least need to. I think that's
Actually,
what
my
we have
second
to.
question, it goes to that is, this is the kind of question that I would put up on email. There's 6 of us, we don't know the schedule, so I would throw out a message to everyone in the group and say, next week I have these 2 options, can anybody go at that option? Shouldn't that be part of regular communication amongst the board? Or does it have to be at this meeting that we arrange it?
I would think if you got
I don't know.
someone that agreed to go with you, then the 2 of you would work
Can
that
set
out,
it
or
up
those
with the chief.
individuals would set it up with the chief.
Well, because in this case, I don't recall the exact thing, but I'll go back to my notes. But that's the kind of stuff that I would like to share with my peers. This is the item that we're going to go ask the chief about.
Can I answer?
Right.
Under the Open Meetings Act, per your emails, you cannot discuss any business.
Okay.
You'll have to discuss it here. As far as meeting with the chief, you absolutely can meet with the chief privately to discuss whatever questions you need asked, but you will whoever meets will need to report it here so that it can be on record. What you discussed. If you're not comfortable with reporting, you can invite the chief to come to a meeting and you can ask her at the meeting so that it is recorded. Any business that is discussed or you're discussing on the behalf of the CPRB, it does have to be documented.
So in this case, I think what you're saying is, even if it's just reporting, I'd look at my notes and I say, I'm going to ask her the 3 questions that we decided.
Yes, if you're asking 3 questions on behalf of the CPRB, it does need to be documented because it is public knowledge.
Before I go.
No, not necessarily
okay.
before you go. Just
Okay.
if you meet
Good.
with her, you'll need to be
Come
able
back
to
and
report
report those.
what your meeting was. And again, if you're not comfortable reporting that, then you can invite her here and ask her the questions, and then we can document it that way.
Okay. So, tell me if you want to. I'll be very happy to go more than one, but in any case, I'll come back and report next time. Okay?
Might I make a recommendation?
Yeah.
So the chief's schedule is fairly complex, as you might imagine. So whatever dates you might be interested in, I would touch base with the chief's administrative assistant, Cassie Heldman, and she can check the chief's schedule and give you a couple different options. That
Yeah.
way you can work around the scheduling issues since there's going to be a group of you.
Yeah. Well, sounds good. Thank you.
So at this time, do we need to decide on who would like to join Ricardo? Or if any, are we okay with Ricardo representing the board? Those are the 2 questions, I believe.
I missed the meeting where this all got started, so I don't know what the 3 questions are. And if they were in the minutes, I don't remember them.
We hadn't formed any question.
Yeah.
So there were no questions. So I guess what would happen is, I remember it was Ricardo, it was your question that you wanted, you had the concern. He simply would go, maybe make an agenda, have the questions, and whatever questions they asked or they talk about there, he would come back and report here. Because we don't have to decide on those questions or anything now, to my understanding.
That's correct.
It's just whatever you talk about, whatever you discuss, you would do that, and then you would bring it back, and that would be reported. And it's understanding that since we motioned and we voted on that if he goes and has that meeting, that we should have some sort of report coming back. And it should be included on the agenda and the time that they went in. So that's a report. So it wouldn't be he goes and then just drops it and there's no report. There would be a report now, and it should be one.
Correct. So from what I'm gathering, Ricardo, you will go on the behalf of the board? Is that what I'm, 'cause I
It
didn't see any
seemed, I didn't see
volunteers.
anyone either, so it
Well, I'd
seemed-
like some, I'd like for someone else to go, so.
So, Scott, you're gonna go?
What I'd suggest is that after the complexity of the schedule thing, get worked out, that Ricardo let staff know what the 2 or 3 potential times, and then we can respond, and, you know, hopefully more than one of us can go, right?
Okay, that'll be fine. I'll
Can I pose a question to you, Ricardo? Are you looking for statistics? Is that what you're looking for?
I recall that was one of our
So something like that might be easiest if you and if the chief wants to do it, or I can do it since I come to these. I mean, if you're just, hey, how many times have you used pepper spray in 2016? I mean, that's something that I can report to you.
Okay. Let me
you know.
look back at the minutes and at my
Sure.
notes, and then I'll touch base with you before I even call Cassie.
I mean, it might be just one of those things that if you're just looking for a couple pieces of information, instead of you trying to coordinate schedules and then pose the questions to Sylvia, which she might or might not have the answers immediately for you. You know, if you're just looking, if it's kind of just a request for information,
Yeah.
it might just be easiest just, you know, for me or the chief to
I
come
like it.
in. So,
I like it. I'll touch base.
okay, thanks.
Madam Secretary, I'm sensing some questions or,
I have a
Reach
question.
Sorry.
Does that not alter our motion if indeed our
But the
motion-
chief can designate someone to stand in her stead.
What I was going to say, if you're asking questions, it's public knowledge and it's already on the website. It's not something that has to be discussed here. If you're just trying to get a clear definition on where this information is, that's not new information. Now, if you're going asking questions that are specific to an understanding about a specific case or an understanding about a specific policy in reference to a case, and that's when it does need to be discussed here. But if it's public knowledge on the on our website, it's there, and they are pretty much will just be directing you to where the information is. So that's not something that needs to be reported back because it's already public knowledge on our website. Does that make sense?
so now my confusion is, are we going to, is the meeting to get public knowledge, or what is actually the intent of the meeting?
As I recall, the questions could not be answered by an officer in this room because they didn't know. And so we don't know yet whether it's going to be public knowledge or if it's going to be a
So,
discussion.
yeah, what
in
I
which
would
they-
suggest is first formulate the questions of what it is that you wanted to know, and we can determine if an actual meeting needs to be set up. It's already been a motion made to be able to have the meeting, so we don't have to make that motion, so we can move forward after you find out what the questions are. And as far as reporting back, we can still report back at the next meeting whether or not a meeting was had, or if it was just primarily just a statistic question where questions could be answered via information that's already available.
Okay.
Say that there's a difference if your questions are in effect to elicit the chief's view of things, which is very different than just a factual question, which maybe can be answered by our wonderful representative here.
Okay. Announcements at this time?
I had one. I'll jump in here. Attended the City of Urbana Human Relations Office traffic stop discussion last night at the Civic Center. Thanks to staff who worked hard at doing that. There were probably 6 tables of between 6 to 8 people who talked about a lot of personal history about traffic stops. I came away a little demoralized because the idea that we have a civilian police review board was neither mentioned during the meeting, brought up by anyone, and when conversation did go to past works of the committee, it was kind of in a negative tone by one of the attendees. So I make that's my own comment, my own summary of the meeting. I think a lot of good things happened there. It was certainly a great open house. The mayor was there, and so she showed her concern with the IDOT numbers, and they talked a little bit about the strategy to continue to follow those. But I offered, my own editorial there as a comment, and I guess a challenge to this group about how involved it wants to be in this community. Education and outreach is something that we've talked about, but we just don't do. I just really kind of felt the hit last night. There were a couple of these that kind of rolled out of people's memories. We were asked the question whether you had been stopped by the Urbana police within the last 2 or 3 years. And many of us, some African American and Caucasian people, hadn't been stopped in their memory. And my own table kind of sort of skidded to a halt, and we were talking about general things about bias and stuff like that. And then lo and behold, a gentleman sat down with his young son that had been confronted, pretty severely at one point in time by Urbana officers. And then those stories kind of unfolded. And I found myself wishing, I wish these people knew about the board. I wish these people believed that we had work to do and that we could advocate for them. And I just left with the feeling that wasn't the case, at least in that little group. So that was last night.
I have raised the issue of the problem for us of not hearing this, of people coming forward, even just in the public session, and letting us know that there's all this that we don't hear about, basically. So we get training in use of force, and we understand the police point of view, I hope fairly well and intelligently, but we don't hear what you heard last night. Am I right?
Yeah, I think in a large part. Way back when, we knew the risks and the benefits of having a system that looked pretty tightly controlled. The requirement for a notarized report. And whether or not some of those decisions that we made and how the board got started are now kind of coming back, I don't want to say to haunt us, but to have an impact on how comfortable people feel at approaching the organization. I'm not sure how that all plays out, but I think the more my intent talking about it here is to plant bugs in people's ears. If we at least talk about the perception of the board amongst ourselves, then maybe we can think of ideas to get the word out there. And I don't want to stimulate a bunch of cases. I don't want to generate complaints to the chief or cause any undue hardship for any officers or whatever. But if people really feel as if they've been mistreated, then we want them to pursue this as an avenue of appeal. So,
this has been our problem almost since day one. And when we talk about outreach, how do we really do it? We thought we were doing it by our very existence, and then some of the materials and some of the meetings we've had. But I mean, why are we here if we're not hearing what's bothering people? What they feel is unfair, what their negative experiences are. I don't hear them, except, just, we know it's out there. We know these feelings are out there, but are they justified? Do we know any facts? We don't hear it. Unless you, on a one-to-one, know people had these experiences, or you go to a meeting like you did and people talk about it.
Didn't we last year discuss the idea of attending like Market at the Square or perhaps any of the events going on in neighborhoods and maybe having a representative there? I thought we had.
We have, and we have also attended, because I've attended Market at the Square where we pass out the flyers.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
We've done
should
that.
we perhaps start thinking about doing that again before the market, more at the beginning of the market?
That's definitely one way to get out. But once you get out again, it's sharing information, letting the public know that we do exist. And once you put that out and give the public that information, that's basically all we can do, because it's up to that individual, whoever has the concern or whatever, to follow the procedures and come in and make the complaint. Because it's like you say, it's kind of almost like a fine line. We can't go out there and solicit this and say,
Right.
are you having a problem? Come in, we can help and we can do this and we
Well,
can
maybe I
advocate
crossed
for
the
it.
line, though, because I've been at meetings in which somebody starts complaining, and I say, file a report. Why not? File a complaint. If you're
have a
if you're
concern-
upset enough, file a complaint.
That's not
Most
going
people,
on.
I think, as we talked earlier, don't want to go through the trouble. They're just venting in that particular spot. But I have been, and I think we got pretty far as the business cards or something small that we could hand to people. This is the procedure. And I thought it was on the card or something like that, because officially we got circulated a draft of what a business card would look like with, so I don't know where that procedure is.
We didn't do that.
Was
So
that
that's a
with-
question for
when
staff.
Alex was here?
Yeah, that was an Alex idea. yeah.
Okay, I don't think that was
He
forwarded on.
circulated, I can cycle back the email, a draft and this spelling out, because it had procedure and our name. And so let me differ with you a little bit, Scott. We do education, being here and being with that camera, because people do watch. There are, at least what I get reached, just, I don't know, 10 people eventually, But that means there's a multiplier there. So we are educating people as long as when we're here, we are talking to the public. But two, we're each present in many places throughout, in between meetings. And I don't have a reservation about speaking up. In fact, I often will say, well, in the police review board, boom, boom, boom. And sometimes it's the training, and sometimes it's just our discussion. I think we're free to do that. Am I?
We're free to do
Oh,
that.
absolutely,
That's
yeah.
free.
And then when somebody starts telling me a story, I say, you know what? If it was really bad or you feel you ought to file a complaint.
And you have to go through the process.
Well,
for it to
you
get
know,
here. Right.
and it's pretty easy to find on the Urbana website. The only thing I didn't know is that we had subpoena power. That's what the website says.
Yeah, we don't.
Well,
I can forward you an email from Todd Brent that where we went to the mat on that.
Champagne does.
I know. I remember it was a big deal with Champagne, and I thought we didn't, but thought the website very clearly says the CPRB is a city board with subpoena power established by Mayor Pressig, 2011. So search it out. But so the information is out there, but I really do think, I go to the market almost every week, and I put myself out there for different things. I love it. It's a lot of people, but they're not coming to get informed most of the time. They're coming to shop. So for me, that's the low traction, low results. It is in the meetings in which we're at if we just handed it out. It's only 8 of us, but those are 8 contact points 10 times a year that we could really massify, like the meeting last night. You had a stack of them. You have a complaint? Here it is, guys. Because it really is up to them, but facilitating, making it so that we're not the obstacle.
Exactly.
Let them be. And I think information provision is where I would highly verify that we are being that, and we should do it just more for, with a couple of aids.
Well, I'm going to put this out there, too. Could we do something like, this is the educator part of me, like an open house, and maybe put it out, come and find out meet the civilian police review board members, and then talk about what we do or how it's here to help you, and take them through that process. But put it out there, maybe do that like once a year, every New Year, sometime, and put that in there, and maybe come here and meet and have them come here and call it an open house. And then you can talk.
For
but
me,
then-
that's what the public time of this meeting is.
Right.
I would be happy with a video or some 5 slides that we projected during this meeting, and we talked about it, because TV reaches a lot of people.
And
So-
Diane, that would be projecting that pamphlet that you and I worked up on, talked about the process and
Yeah.
the procedure. And we've done that.
Yeah, so
And
if
we
we
have
just
that.
put it at the beginning of this meeting or as part of the recording, I think that would educate a lot of people as
Mm-hmm.
to who we are, how we do it. And not that I want more cases showing up, but when there's an opportunity for people
Or
to
highlight a piece of what we do each meeting, like here, this is what
There
we
you
do,
go.
reach out, highlight it. 'cause
put
you
the
don't have to
slides,
cover
put
it
all the slides and only highlight that one piece
and
once in a while.
Or
Yeah.
sections of it, exactly.
I love it.
I want to clarify. You're talking about the appeals, because you don't get the initial complaints.
I know, but the appeals are part of the complaint process.
Correct.
So
And I think
teaching
that's
people
where
that
the
there is a
ball
complaint
is being
process,
dropped,
and
right.
some of it ends up here, I think, not only on the transparency side, but on the validation. If, this isn't just going in some bucket, it's going through, it's going to go to the chief, it's going to be reviewed, and then if there's disagreement, it comes to here. That, I think people, at least for me, it's validating. It feels like, wait a minute, I'm not alone, and if something were to happen. I sell our Urbana, the police department, a lot. I didn't know we required degrees. I didn't know several people applying for jobs everywhere else. And I'm like, well, in Urbana, I feel like I'm bragging by saying what we've learned. And I think it's because they don't know. They assume that in their little towns, somebody can walk up and get a badge. And it's like, well, not in Urbana. And it feels good. So people should know part of that, part of the procedure, of the complaint procedure. You guys are trying to figure it out in Champaign, but we've had it for a little while, right? And I think it's a pride marker for Urbana. We do talk. We figure it out together. I love that.
So I think these are all good ideas. I think maybe more than just one idea, perhaps the cards. I still believe that some folks might be able to be, if there's like a neighborhood function, like Jetty Roads
Yeah.
in my neighborhood, things like that. I think that a presence by the city and perhaps a member of one of the 8 of us there, I would certainly do Jetty Roads because that is my neighborhood. I think we also need to reach out more to the Hispanic community. They're not going to come in this building, a lot of them, let's face it. And I think it would behoove, I can't even say that, I'm so tired, behoove us to make some effort to go to them.
Well, there you go. So I'm in that community. I'm part of it, and the places that I go, the end of the year picnic over there at Ivanhoe, the police are always there. They're all mingling, and it feels very good. I think at that point I have talked about the police review board and making a complaint when you do, because people, when they're sitting around a picnic, they'll talk. The cops are over there, and we have a story. But on the other hand, this year we're talking about putting up a stage in which we could formalize the presentation too. But I think Alex had that card with the procedure in Spanish too. So I'll forward it back to
If
you.
you have that, if you can send it, 'cause
because
that
it would
didn't
be,
come down.
so $20-30 to print 500 little cards.
You have the budget.
And we have a
Which would
budget.
come from the budget.
Yeah.
Everybody's learning.
And we
that's
have
for
a
the
budget. We could do it. It would not be so hard. The Hispanic community has 2 or 3 good contact points where we can distribute. So
There are also people, within the school district who I think it would be good for us to touch base with. I work for Unit 116, so I know who those folks are. I just think, again, I think that perhaps could we come up with, as part of as an agenda item for next time, maybe coming up with a more solid plan of what this might look like going forward with the things like, as the Ivy suggestion, and the, setting those dates and determining who might be the individuals who might be involved in that.
I'd be happy.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. The last few times I've walked through this building, I can't find any CPRB trifold brochures. Hopefully
if
that
you
me-
do, they're out of date.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure if they're out of date or not, but it's been a while since that language has been, so that we could set ourselves up for that task. I mean, Diane and I hit that pretty hard with Todd Rent many years ago. I'd be happy to have somebody else read it and wordsmith it. But, that comes to mind, for example, as a preparatory move to that. The cards that you were talking about, Alex, doing that, were bilingual, is another thing that we could discuss
get to
in a
the-
meeting that actually had outreach as a focus. So,
To get to your point, though, Scott, Megan's already mentioned that, and you have mentioned, we have a brochure. All we have to do is let staff know we need to print up more so we can have them available, right?
Some of the brochures, though, I think we need to look at them and see if they're up to date.
Okay. Well, as long as we have some now, and then we have a process for updating it. The cards have already been approved, because I
That's been some
remember that
time
a year ago, so all we have to do is do the logistics of it, and then we could print them and we would have them. So by next meeting, to your point, we could put together a better plan, but we have things that are already approved. We just need to
They'd
get
have to
them
be
moving.
re-approved through the current.
We'll have to relook, because it was so far back, we need to pull it back out and you guys take a look at it. Because from what my understanding is that everybody is not 100% clear on what the cards look like. And because Alex was the person over it, my suggestion is that we take a look at it again. So when we're printing the brochures and the cards, it isn't again.
Well, that was 6 months ago, though, I think.
No, Alex
You were
hasn't
part of the
been.
cards. Michael wouldn't be part of the cards.
No.
yeah.
He wouldn't
Yeah, well,
have it,
so
no.
I guess what I'm going to suggest is that we review material that staff has.
Correct.
And that we have an agenda item during which we will all mark it up and then come and try to talk through a draft.
Is that in 3 months, Scott?
Well, we don't have to wait for 3 months to have a meeting.
I mean, it
We're
just
not
doesn't make
limited
sense
to-
to me if we're going to have an action plan, that we wait 3 months to come up with it, 3 months to approve it. It's stuff that, this is outreach. I mean, you
think the
talk
3
when
months
there
might
is.
have been what happened to the business cards, too. Yeah. So could we all be in agreement of having a meeting earlier where we go over what materials we have, and then once we approve these materials, what we're going to do with them? And
I'm in favor of that.
It doesn't have to be a long meeting, especially if we've seen them.
Is that including the pamphlets, the flyers, or all the material that we need to go over and update? We're talking about all that.
Yes, can you guys just get the material to me as soon as possible so that I can circulate it through an email so that you all have a chance to look at it before the meeting, so that you will have a talking point of the things that you possibly want to change or not change for that matter.
I think the Rights and Responsibilities pamphlet is on the city's website. The cards, I don't know where they are.
They didn't make it to the public. It was an internal email.
That's okay if you have it, if someone
Whatever
has
we
it.
have, we need to get it to
Yeah,
you.
if you would get it to me. I wasn't here.
Via
Yeah.
email and everything.
Yeah, and that's fine. I just wanted to compile an email so that we can just have it all on one email for you all to take a look at, so that you're not having to look for the material. I just want to get it to you so it's easier for you, that's all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other announcements or comments? Okay. At this time, I'd like to obtain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved?
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. It is 6:55.